The flight from Denver to New York was full. Every seat was taken, the aisles buzzed with chatter and the familiar hum of boarding chaos. Among the travelers was a woman in her 50s, sitting quietly in row 9. She wore a faded military jacket, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun. She didn't talk to anyone. No smile, no complaints, just silence, and a faraway look in her eyes as she stared out the window. Most people didn't notice her. The ones who did gave her a brief glance, then turned away, assuming she was just another tired traveler. But she wasn't. What no one knew was that the woman in row 9 had logged over 3,000 hours in the sky, most of them in combat zones. Her name was Dana Myers, a retired Air Force colonel, but she didn't share that with anyone. She never needed to. She had learned long ago that true strength never demands attention. Midway through the flight, the cabin suddenly jolted. A sharp drop. Gasps and panic rippled through the passengers. Oxygen masks fell. Children cried. The captain's voice came through the intercom, tense and clipped, announcing a technical malfunction. Fear spread instantly. Some passengers prayed, others screamed. But Dana unbuckled her belt without a word. Calm, precise, she stood and walked toward the cockpit. A flight attendant moved to stop her, but then the cockpit door opened, and the pilot froze. His face changed. Recognition lit his eyes. "Ma'am, is it really you?" he asked, stunned. Dana leaned in and whispered her call sign, one he hadn't heard since his own days in uniform. He stepped aside without hesitation. "Give her the chair," he told the co-pilot. "She's flown through worse than this." Inside the cockpit, Dana took over like she never left. Her hands moved with certainty, her voice calm and commanding. She guided the crew through emergency procedures, stabilizing the aircraft. When they finally landed safely, emergency crews were waiting, but Dana didn't stay for applause. She quietly stepped off the plane, disappearing into the crowd. The passengers never knew her name. But the pilot would never forget. Sometimes, the quietest one among us carries the power to save us all. And sometimes, the hero sits silently, in row 9. The plane was cruising smoothly over the Midwest when the first jolt hit, sudden, sharp, and violent enough to make drinks spill and hearts race. Within seconds, another tremor shook the cabin, stronger this time. Passengers screamed as the aircraft lurched downward. The overhead compartments rattled, and flight attendants grabbed onto seats, trying to maintain composure. Then came the chilling sound, oxygen masks dropping from above, followed by the captain's voice, distorted and tense. "This is your captain speaking, we're experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm and stay seated." But calm was nowhere to be found. Children cried. A man clutched his wife's hand. A woman prayed loudly, her voice trembling. The cabin, once filled with harmless chatter, now buzzed with sheer panic. Some people began shouting questions, demanding answers, desperate for comfort. But amidst the chaos, one figure remained completely still, the woman in row 9. She didn't flinch. Her breathing steady, her eyes focused. While others scrambled for control, she reached down, unbuckled her seatbelt, and stood up with silent purpose. A flight attendant called out, "Ma'am, please return to your seat." But the woman didn't stop. She moved forward down the narrow aisle, not in fear, not in defiance, but like someone who had done this before. Like someone who already knew what to do. As she approached the cockpit, turbulence rocked the plane again. People screamed, but she never stumbled. There was something in her presence, calm, steady, unshakable, that felt out of place amid the hysteria. As if she didn't belong to the chaos at all. The cockpit door opened a crack, and when the pilot's eyes met hers, everything paused. Recognition flickered. A flicker turned into shock. Then, respect. Without a word, she leaned in and spoke quietly, just a few syllables, enough for only him to hear. And with that whisper, everything changed. He turned to his crew and said, "Let her through. Now." In a moment where everyone else was losing control, the woman in row 9 walked straight into the eye of the storm, not as a passenger, but as a pilot. A leader. A protector. Because while the world around her was falling apart, she had already lived through worse, and survived. The cockpit door cracked open just enough for the pilot to peer out, his face pale, drenched in stress. But when his eyes locked onto the woman approaching down the aisle, something changed. For a heartbeat, the chaos faded. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in recognition. The lines on his face softened, his posture shifted, and then, without hesitation, he stepped fully into view. A flight attendant tried to intervene. "Sir," she was coming toward the... But he raised a hand to stop her, his eyes never leaving the woman in row 9. "Ma'am," he breathed, almost in disbelief, "is it really you?" The cabin behind her was still unraveling, passengers panicking, children crying, alarms quietly pinging, but the space between them felt frozen in time. The woman said nothing. She stepped closer, leaned in, and whispered a single word. It wasn't her name. It wasn't a request. It was her call sign, a forgotten nickname from another lifetime. One the pilot hadn't heard in decades. A word that spoke volumes in military circles. A word that could only belong to a legend. His eyes widened. She stepped back. He didn't question her. He didn't hesitate. He turned to his young co-pilot and said in a voice filled with both urgency and reverence, "Get up. Give her the chair." The co-pilot blinked in surprise, unsure. But the captain clarified with a single, staggering line. "She flew through worse than this in the Gulf. No rank needed. No badge. Just history." The co-pilot slid out of his seat, and Colonel Dana Myers took his place, quietly, confidently, as if it had always been hers. Outside, storm clouds brewed and warning lights blinked red. But inside the cockpit, there was a sudden and unmistakable calm. She wasn't just a woman in row 9 anymore. She was the pilot now. Colonel Dana Myers slid into the co-pilot's seat with quiet authority, as if no time had passed since her last mission. The control panel blinked with warning lights. The storm outside roared against the fuselage. Altitude dropped. Systems flickered. But her hands moved with calm precision, flipping switches, scanning gauges, assessing damage. The captain, still rattled, glanced at her for guidance, and she gave it, steady and firm. "Stabilize pitch. Don't fight the wind, ride it," she said, her voice cool and composed. The turbulence hadn't stopped, but something else had, the panic. In the cockpit and slowly, through the cabin. She reached for the radio, relayed their position, called for emergency landing clearance. Every word was sharp, clear, practiced. Not 1 ounce of fear leaked through. Back in the cabin, passengers still clung to their seats, some praying, some weeping, but now, they could sense a shift. The crew moved with more confidence. The tension began to dissolve, like smoke clearing from a battlefield. She wasn't just reading instruments, she was reading the sky. Her eyes tracked patterns in the clouds, instinct guiding every decision. She leaned forward slightly, took the controls with the captain, and made one final adjustment. The plane steadied. She wasn't just a woman in row 9, the narrator's voice echoes gently, she was Colonel Dana Myers, a retired Air Force combat pilot. She'd flown through war zones, dodged enemy fire, landed on broken runways, and survived. And now, in a moment of pure crisis, she was doing what she had always done, saving lives. There was no applause, no dramatic music, no spotlight. Just the quiet, commanding presence of someone who had lived through storms far greater than this, and who knew how to guide others through them. Because when everything else falls apart, sometimes all it takes is one calm voice, one steady hand, one soul who refuses to panic. And that day, that soul sat in the cockpit. After walking up from row 9. The wheels screeched against the runway as the plane touched down, skidding slightly before settling into a steady roll. The cabin erupted, first in stunned silence, then in thunderous applause. People cried. Strangers hugged. Some simply stared out the window, overwhelmed with gratitude that they were still alive. On the ground, emergency vehicles raced alongside the plane, lights flashing, ready for the worst. But the worst had been avoided, thanks to someone no one had noticed when they first boarded. Colonel Dana Myers stood from the co-pilot's seat without a word. She gave the captain a nod, more like a comrade's farewell than a thank you, and made her way down the narrow aisle. As she walked past the rows of stunned passengers, some looked up at her with curiosity, not yet knowing what she had done. To them, she was still just a quiet woman in a military jacket from row 9. She exited the plane the old-fashioned way, down the metal stairs onto the tarmac. No interviews. No cameras. Just her footsteps echoing on the pavement, fading into the background as emergency crews swarmed around. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't need it. The pilot stood at the top of the steps, watching her go. He didn't stop her. He didn't call her back. He just whispered her name under his breath, almost like a prayer, Colonel Myers. He knew who she was. And thanks to her, 183 people would go home to their families that night. No medals. No spotlight, the narrator says softly. Just quiet footsteps into the terminal. Only the pilot knew who she truly was. But that day, 183 strangers were alive, because of her. Sometimes, heroes don't wear uniforms anymore. They don't carry rank. They don't stand at podiums or appear on TV. Sometimes, they sit quietly among us. Not asking to be seen. Not needing to be thanked. Just waiting, for the moment they're needed most. And then, like a ghost of duty past, the woman in row 9 disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a story no one would forget.